In the recent Year 4 Season 3 mid-season designer notes, we found out that Twitch was going to receive a nerf and Jaeger had a pick rate of 90%. I don't want to focus too much on Twitch's nerf. Instead, I'm more concerned about Jaeger's insane pick rate. But in order to talk about Jaeger's insane pick rate, we need to talk about Twitch as well, and her F2. So in the Year 4 Season 2 designer notes, with the Phantom Sight release, they increased the recoil of the F2. Twitch's pick rate moved from 60% to 43% per round. And already, we need to acknowledge the fact that Jaeger currently has a 90% presence per round and is not receiving a nerf. The primary concern, of course, from Ubisoft is that her KDR was 1.25 and then moved to 1.17. With the recent Barcelona and Hot Breach podcast that happened between Ubisoft, we actually learned that Twitch's KDR is around 1.13 and is still receiving the mag change from 31 bullets to 26 bullets with one extra in the chamber. I completely agree that 1, Twitch has way too much fragging power. 2, being a top pick performing operator needs some kind of balance. And 3, her ability is crucial to team play. But I don't think Twitch is the operator worth focusing on as much as it's Jaeger, who 1, has too much fragging power, 2, is a top pick performing operator, and 3, his ability is crucial to team play. Jaeger boasts a 1.23 KDR with the 416C, and those are numbers that I'm grabbing once again from the Hot Breach podcast with Ubisoft. He has a current 90% pick rate and a 0% win rate, but in the past, in Year 4 Season 2, we saw his win rate was actually around 1.5. So it has fell for some reason, but I'm not going to really explore why that might be, because I don't think it's that important. It might honestly be because his pick rate is just so much higher now. The biggest problem with Jaeger is this. The primary method that Siege enables attackers to push is through attacking throwables, e.g. grenades, stuns, Candelas, etc., to minimize risk of or during engagement. But Jaeger's utility, his ADSs or Magpies, zap the trajectory of projectiles thrown from the safety of across the room. I can throw a grenade from outside of armory wall, but if there's an ADS by half wall, that ADS can still catch the grenade, and I might not even know that there was an ADS there because all I know is there's a player by half wall. And this to me is, well, I don't think that the ADS for the Magpies should be changed, but the frequency of which there are ADSs is the biggest issue here for me. Number 2, Jaeger maximizes all of his utility during the prep phase. But lastly, Jaeger's high fragging power of the 416C carbine means that he also has an extremely high popularity. And the fact of the matter is that there's just no negatives to playing Jaeger. A severe mag size change from 31 to 21 wouldn't necessarily shake the competitive usage of Jaeger being so utility focused, but would increase ranked defender selection diversity. I'll go back to that example at Armory Wall, trying to throw a nade into half wall. Merely the fear of an ADS limits the attacking creativity in a utility-centered FPS that's already defender-sided. It's impossible to stress just how oppressive Jaeger is for attackers. Maybe I don't want to throw a nade at half wall because there might be an ADS that captures my grenade, and now I don't have to jump on the defender since they get the audio cue that, hey, there's an attacker trying to push my position from outside armory wall. And yes, while you can ban Jaeger, I really think it's so important for the health of the game to reduce Jaeger as a default pick. Moreover, this is a great way to indirectly buff Warden in a way that doesn't alter the game other than just reducing Jaeger's popularity and his fragging potential. The other thing too that I want to caution against is entry for attackers is becoming more and more difficult with new defender utility being introduced, e.g. Goyo now blocks doorways, Mozzie makes droning very difficult, Cade is anti-hard breach, Clash, again doorways, whereas attacking operators continue to receive nerfs. And Nomad and Gridlock were great for carving out a new sub-operator type in anti-flank, but since Maverick, maybe Knock, we haven't had new answers to defender utility. If rumors are true and the next season releases a second Jaeger, the meta will only continue to shift further in favor of defenders. The other thing to talk about is if we look at the attackers with high win deltas, we'll notice that all of them share a couple of traits. The first we need to talk about is Blackbeard. Blackbeard has an ability that is unique to him. It's very selfish, but requires really no use of projectiles. Then Gridlock. Gridlock has utility that doesn't really concern Jaeger because her tracks go through those ADSs. Dokkaebi Lion and Finka are all operators that have global abilities, and while Finka and Dokkaebi both have nades, really you bring them for the ability of either the sum of 3 operators' health or knowing exactly where defenders are because of those logic bomb calls. Then there's Nomad. Nomad can burn ADSs herself and enable her own utility, which is those air jabs. She can also, in theory, burn all 3 ADSs, though I don't think many people are using her in that respect. IQ's right at that line. She doesn't really interact with ADSs other than maybe removing them. Twitch, kind of the same thing. Her fragging ability is built in through the F2. Her Twitch drone doesn't care about ADSs. Ashe can burn ADSs by herself with her flashbangs and then enable her own utility. Thatcher actually removes ADSs. Habana and Thermite both have flashbangs to remove ADSs. Zafia can at least burn ADSs too through her concussion mines or through her launcher, depending on which one she actually needs to enable. And even Jackal. Jackal's ability doesn't really care, his primary ability doesn't really care about whether or not there's an ADS. Then let's look at operators who are below the 0 win delta. Those happen to be our 2 primary soft breachers in Buck and Sledge. And the important thing to note here is that why would you pick Buck or Sledge over Ashe and Zafia when these 2 operators can breach from a safer distance? Also, Buck and Sledge are considered to be great soft breaching operators because they bring nades. But if those are getting zapped by ADSs, then what's the point? There's not a whole lot to talk about when we think about Fuse, Amaru, and Maverick in respect to Jaeger. But I do want to touch on Yang. Yang is underperforming because her Candelas can be caught by ADSs. And I really think that Yang should have a low presence, but be an operator who's considered to be too strong. Because her ability is, in theory, supposed to be so powerful, but again, because Jaeger is so prominent, is not an ability that players maybe feel that they can take advantage of all the time. We'll skip Glaz, Knock, the shield operators because they're not really relevant to this discussion, in my opinion. And we'll lastly touch on Capitao. Capitao is considered to be the attacking operator that offers the most utility in the entire game. And I think Capitao's low presence, low win delta, underscores a primary issue in the meta that Ubisoft is driving with Jaeger, which is the game, despite being operator-centric, doesn't focus enough on utility at the moment. Players aren't comfortable, and Capitao's underperforming because they're not comfortable with utility. If you look at the defender win rates, you'll notice that a lot of the higher utility operators in Goyo, Cade, Smoke are also really low. And again, I think this is because players don't know how to use high utility operators. If you're wondering why trap operators in Rook are so strong in the current meta, I think that this is because players are able to realize the full value of those operators during the prep phase. Rook, for instance, places armor plates instantly. Frost and Capcan are substantially higher than Ela, and that's because I think a lot of players use Ela's Grismot mines a little later than placing them all down during the prep phase. Really a great case study here is the difference between Rook and Doc. Doc offers more health than Rook does, but the thing is that if you can maximize your value that you give to the team at the start of the game, then you somehow come on top based on these charts. And that's why Rook has a substantially higher win delta than Doc does. I also, as a player, don't really have the ability to detect all of the ADSs. Like, yes, you can bring in IQ, but IQ can't actually necessarily remove those ADSs, not without having to enter into the building, but she doesn't have utility that enables her to enter into the building. And then, yes, you can try to drone where the ADSs are placed, but more often than not, there's a defender who will shoot your drone before you have a clear picture of the entirety of the room setup. So it becomes really difficult for you to figure out what you need to do in order to enable your utility. Let's also consider that because we don't have the luxury of droning all the time, if we, for instance, have Ash burning an ADS, as she should, she needs to throw 2 flashbangs to burn 1 ADS, and then typically a player will throw an additional flashbang in order to ensure that her utility or any utility after, can be used in that same proximity. Jaeger has the potential to counter up to 3 operators with grenades, and I would also argue 3 operators with flashbangs, which brings us to a total of too many operators to handle 1 operator. By reducing the frequency of Jaeger and not releasing another operator that essentially does the same function as Jaeger, I think we make the game more interesting. One of the primary reasons why I'm drawn to Rainbow is because of the interactions between operators, and because the rank diversity right now is so low, since Jaeger dominates the meta, we lose a lot of those interesting interactions. We're moving to a point in the meta where it's just going to become very stale for attackers because they don't have the tools anymore in order to counter what defenders are bringing. And while the focus of this video has been the lack of defender diversity, what I think we'll begin to see, or maybe we're already seeing, is a lack of attacking diversity. One of the coolest things about Siege is that there's a handful of ways to solving a single problem, but if the number of attackers that we see in the meta is pretty defined, then we won't see that variety in gameplay. The way to solve this problem, as I already mentioned, is to nerf Jaeger's 416C carbine, reduce its fragging power, and therefore reduce Jaeger's popularity and frequency in order to enable more diversity in defender selection and also attacking selection.